The Expression of Wisdom by Mehmet Karahisari. Lesson 3. Al-Qur'an al-Hakim, Part 2. Here we are now speaking of the secrets of the Quran. The Quran opens in different ways for people in different contexts and at different degrees. If the exoteric jurists were fair-minded, they would see even while looking at the same verse with the exoteric gaze they have mutually agreed upon that each of them understands it at a different degree, that some among them speak with greater mastery concerning the meaning of that verse and others understand it deficiently, and they would draw a lesson from this. Yet despite not perceiving these differences so plainly visible among themselves, they nonetheless immediately deny it whenever a member of the people of God offers an interpretation close to their comprehension. God the Exalted has said, He gives wisdom to whomever He wills. This wisdom is knowledge. Accordingly, God has servants whose instruction in their secrets God has Himself undertaken, training them in their secrets through the books He has sent down and through the tongues of His prophets. This is sound knowledge taken from the alam and al-muallim, knower and teacher, that teacher in whose mastery of knowledge no believer, and no non-believer either, harbors doubt. That is to say, God through His solicitude, has taken some servants as friends, and has Himself undertaken their training by inspiring them and causing them to understand. Indeed, in this regard Al has said, this is simply an understanding that God gives, in the matter of this Quran, to whomever He wills. As is seen, Al expresses this as a divine gift, meaning thereby the understanding received from God. For this reason the people of God accept and submit to the conditions of the exoteric scholars, for they know from where they speak, and by naming the truths as signs, they have protected themselves from the exoteric scholars. For the exoteric scholars do not deny signs. If you too are possessed of an expansive breath, then plunge into the ocean of the noble Quran. But if you are not possessed of an expansive breath, then content yourself with studying the books in which the commentators have interpreted the Quran according to its exoteric dimension, and do not plunge into the ocean. Otherwise you will perish. For this ocean of the Quran is very deep. Moreover, were it not that the one who plunges there aims to bring something forth from its shallower reaches near the shore, he could bring nothing forth at all. Those who aim to plunge into these depths for the sake of being a mercy to the worlds, they are the prophets and their inheritors. Those who arrive but do not return, who remain stationed where they have arrived, have benefited no one and have been benefited by no one. These are souls that have turned toward the depths of the ocean, have even been drawn into it. They have remained there eternally and can no longer emerge. In this framework, the path and the journey, the connection with the Quran al-Hakim in the legacy of the Prophet Muhammad in the farewell sermon, I leave you two things. One is the Quran, the other is my household. This connection is the concern of reading and understanding this book correctly, of acting in accordance with it, that is, of becoming a possessor of a Furqan. The Quran opens according to temperament, knowledge, path, and Furqan according to a degree. It is therefore an individual journey. This is also the reason these lessons are held. Ibn Arabi sets forth in advance many meanings that would not be perceivable in the course of the path and the journey. The aim is to be able to walk with this awareness. Under normal circumstances, work in the Akbarian tradition is mostly confined to readings of the few al-Hakim. But here the matter is the correct understanding of what we call the Quran, the journey, and the Quranic expedition. We read the Quran al-Hakim first and foremost as a book of wisdom, as the Quran itself expresses it. We have no objection to those who read it as a book of love, or to those who read it as a book of jurisprudence and sacred law. Our concern, however, is wisdom. For the Quran, when read through wisdom, is the Quran al-Hakim. Ibn Arabi says, the wayfarer on the Quranic journey reads the Quran from several aspects. Some read, according to their temperament, the generous Quran, some read the glorious Quran, some read the mighty Quran. We, however, read it as the al-Quran al-Hakim. Accordingly, the chapters that look toward this meaning are our priority. Ibn Arabi makes the following observation concerning the Quran al-Hakim: whoever has been given the power to understand the Quran, and this we call comprehension, has been given wisdom. This statement establishes that the comprehension by which one understands the Quran and wisdom point to the same meaning. Second, he says, the aspirant is the one who finds in the Quran the wayfarer is addressed directly, and this is possible when we look at the meaning of the Quran al-Hakim through these two statements. Quran descends into his heart. Ibn Arabi makes, first, the following observation concerning the nature of the Quran. He notes that the chapters up to Surat al-Ar in the order of revelation represent the common portion of the Prophet Muhammad and the former prophets, while Surat al-Najm and the subsequent chapters belong exclusively to the Prophet Muhammad. Surat al-Najm, the star, recounts how the ascension was accomplished. In the order of revelation, al-Najm is the 23rd chapter and al-Isrāʼ is the 49th. From this we understand the following: the ascension is not, for the Prophet Muhammad, a meaning that occurred once only but one that occurred multiple times. Surat al-Najm recounts the first journeys, the path and the journey itself. Surat al-Isrāʼ recounts the ultimate degree. In Surat al-Isrāʼ, together with the prayer revealed as the fruit of the ascension, the wisdoms that were revealed, that is, the 10 commandments, are expressed. In the verse, these are among the wisdoms that your Lord has revealed to you. Al-Isrāʼ 1739, revelation and wisdom are mentioned separately. Before this verse, rulings such as refraining from associating partners with God and not saying even ugh to one's parents are recounted. The meaning transmitted to the Prophet Luqman and to Moses through the 10 Commandments is set forth in al-Isrāʼ as the wisdoms given ultimately to the Prophet Muhammad. What is particularly striking here is that the address is made through the divine name Lord. The Quran al-Hakim speaks of wisdom in those verses in which the Prophet Muhammad received a face-to-face encounter with his Lord. In this sense, when the Quran al-Hakim is read through wisdom, it becomes apparent that the ascension is a fundamental benchmark. For these verses are expressed as wisdoms revealed from your Lord, al-Isrāʼ 1739. As Ibn Arabi expresses it within his metaphysical framework, the uppermost limit of gnosis in the form it was realized in the Prophet Muhammad is the ascension to his Lord through the most beautiful names. This is an ascension at the degree of al-Rahman, by way of the passage through Sidrat al-Muntaha and the transition to the Kursi and Thirsh. This is our first benchmark. Proceeding from this, Ibn Arabi speaks of the legacy of the Prophet Muhammad. He evaluates in this context the statement underlined in the farewell sermon: I leave you two things as legacy, one is the Quran, the other is my household. He says that there are two distinct kinds of legacy, one is the sensory legacy. He continues, these are words, deeds, outward states, wives, children, and relatives. The spiritual legacy, however, pertains to a divine gaze and consideration. The most important point that Ibn Arabi underlines here regarding being an inheritor of the Quranic legacy is knowing the station of divine wisdom. What shall be inspired to you in the matter of understanding the Quran and the truths of the cosmos, that is my spiritual legacy, he says. And here he cites the verse of inheritance: before the inheritance, give God and the messenger their due. He explains the true inheritance as follows: our inheritance, and the meaning in the sense of the scholars are the inheritors of the prophets, that is the Quran, and the meaning of being able to be an inheritor. Third, he recounts the standing of the Quran al-Hakim in relation to the other books. This too is an important benchmark. He says, the Quran has been named Quran, written without the Hamza, with its reality as the all-gathering, because it gathers together all the knowledge that is dispersed across the other divine books and scrolls. And it has been called Kitab because it is gathered together in the form of chapters. He underlines an important point here, stating that the chapters are themselves independently complete books. For this reason, the repetition of certain matters across different chapters of the Quran is not repetition in the ordinary sense, but meanings reconstructed afresh in different contexts. The Quran does not possess the organizational structure of a book in the classical sense. Its contents and themes cannot be read through engineering-style architecture. The Quran is the gathering into book form of all meanings from Adam to the Prophet Muhammad in the company of 114 independent chapters. In this sense, when reading the Quran, the chapters must be understood correctly as independent books in their own right. Ibn Arabi states that the divine classification within the Quran possesses a hierarchically ordered structure, saying, "The chapters of the Quran al-Hakim are the stations of the Quran." He states that the chapters beginning with the isolated letters such as Aleph, Lam, Mim and Aleph, Lam, ārabī with Makron constitute a structure classified through the isolated letters. He speaks of how the chapters beginning with Aleph, Lam, Mim point to the highest degree saints and to the Muhammadan sainthood. Ibn Arabi reads the sign first for the Quran has, in a sense, its own ciphers. He enters this and he conducts his reading through these beginning with oaths. In his view, there are three kinds of oaths at the openings of chapters in the Quran. This classification simultaneously entails reading the Quran in three senses. The first is related to remembrance, as at the opening of Surat al-A with Makron ff, by the Quran of remembrance. This is a degree, and such classifications express degrees. The second is the reading related to glory, which appears in the opening verse of Surat al-Kahf, by the glorious Quran. Concerning the meanings related to the wayfarer in the Quranic journey, Ibn Arabi states, "The wayfarer reads the Quran in three ways according to his temperament, that is, according to his names." In the Furqan journey there are three kinds of wayfarer. The first wayfarer reads the Quran as the generous. This is a reading that unfolds through the verses of beauty as we understand them. The second wayfarer reads through the glorious. Here Jalal and Jamal are together. The third wayfarer reads through the wise. Indeed, the oath appearing in the second verse of Surat Yasin, by the Quran al-Hakim, and its counterparts in numerous other chapters express precisely this meaning. As is thus seen, the chapters in the Quran that begin with the oaths of by point to a specific classification. The oaths following the chapters that begin with isolated letters such as Aleph, Lam, Mim and Aleph, Lam, ārabī with Makron permit a classification of the books within the Quran. In this sense, in the Quran there is so to speak a threefold classification by way of the oaths. In addition, there are also chapters that begin with the direct mention of a book name. At this juncture the expression "the manifest book" comes to the fore. The expression in the first verse of Surat Yusuf, "These are the verses of the manifest book," is repeated in Surat al-Kahf and Surat al-Shura as well. This shows that there is a book called the manifest book, and that these chapters situate themselves from the very outset within that book. The names of the wise pointing to the section related to the Quran al-Hakim appear first in the opening of Surat Luqman in the expression Aleph, Lam, Mim. These are the verses of the wise book, and subsequently in the opening of Surat Yunus in the expression Aleph, Lam, ārabī with Makron. These are the verses of the wise book. In this case it is seen that the books are classified in two ways, as manifest and wise. These opening verses show what classification the Quran possesses within itself. Accordingly, the Quran announces the context to which it belongs, first through the isolated letters, then through oaths, and third by directly naming the book. Another aspect to be taken into consideration when reading the Quran is the emphasis on tanzil. Here degrees are directly at issue. In the first verse of Surat al-Sajdah, the sending down of the book is from the Lord of the worlds. It is announced that the revealed book comes from the Lord of the worlds. In the first verse of Surat al-Zumar, the sending down of the book is from the mighty, the wise. In Surat Ghafir, the sending down of the book is from the mighty, the all-knowing. And in Surat Fulat, a sending down from the all-merciful, the ever-merciful. These verses show that the Quran was sent down from different degrees of the divine names. Ibn Arabi states that all the verses completed with the phrase, "There are signs in the Quran, look toward the possessors of kernels." According to the Quran al-Hakim, the possessors of kernels are the people of wisdom. They are the possessors of sound reason who look not at the shells but at the kernels of matters. For this reason, they seek out meanings. Ibn Arabi, while himself at the degree of possessors of kernels, says, "When I was at the station of this class and read Surat al-Rum and arrived at the verse, and among his signs is that he created you to sleep by night and by day, and that you seek of his bounty, al-Rum 30:23, I was utterly overwhelmed with wonder at the beauty of the Quran's gathering." The Quranic journey advances degree by degree. Encountering this verse at the degree of the possessors of kernels, that is, the degree of wisdom, opened for Ibn Arabi a distinct door of perception. In this context, it is necessary to understand the addressees of the addresses in the Quran. As stated previously, one of the elements of gnosis is knowing the divine address. The addresses in the Quran are explicit and directed toward specific groups. In this framework, the following classification emerges: those who reflect, those who reason, those who hear, the scholars, those who are God-wary, the possessors of sound reason, the possessors of kernels, the possessors of insight. These addresses express different degrees. The possessors of sound reason denote a deeper degree of perception. The possessors of kernels, through their aspect looking toward both heart and intellect, denote the degree of the mystery, and the possessors of insight denote the degree of vision and direct witnessing. The Quran addresses each of these degrees directly. Ibn Arabi offers an elucidation concerning those whose hearts have been sealed, saying, "The heart of the one who is a true scholar is not sealed." In verse 108 of Surat al-Nahl, it is declared, "Those are the ones whose hearts, eyes, and ears God has sealed." The sealing here means to lock, to set a stamp upon. According to Ibn Arabi, the seal placed upon the ear is a veil drawn between the ear and the heart. Likewise, the expression upon their eyes is a covering. Al-Baqarah 2:7 points to the severing of the bond between the eye and the heart, that is, an impediment is placed between them. In verse 46 of Surat al-Hajj, it is declared, "For it is not the eyes that are blind, but it is the hearts within the breasts that are blind," expressing that the essential matter is the severing of the bond between the heart and its instruments of perception. This means that the heart loses its faculty of seeing and hearing. What the Quran expresses as the seal is precisely this, the blinding of insight. Indeed, the addresses in the Quran, such as "Do you not look?" are directed precisely toward this bara. At the center of the connection established with the Quran al-Hakim is reading. However, the reading intended here is not one that consists merely in repeating the literal wording of a text. What the Quran means by reading is a journey in which the human being places himself within the divine address and walks in submission to it. For this reason, the question "What is reading?" also determines how the servant positions himself before this address. In verse 121 of Surat al-Baqarah, it is declared, "Those to whom we have given the book recite it as it truly deserves to be recited, and they believe." The term used here is tilawah, reading the text from the page. Iqra, on the other hand, is a different kind of reading. According to Ibn Arabi, to read, that is, to recite, is to follow, to track, and to comply. There is no question of a reading done without understanding. Just as the verses of the book follow one upon another, that is, are recited, tutla, so too does the person who reads them walk step by step upon those verses, following them. For this reason, the nature of reading is not the repetition of literal wording, but the entering into meaning and the tracking of its trace. To be able to track this trace, we need to understand certain terms well. The Quran is constituted of two kinds of verse, the inviolable and the allegorical. In Ibn Arabi's words, the inviolable verse is the verse that indicates the oneness of God, that is, it ultimately returns to a single verse, La ilaha illa Allah. The allegorical, however, is a trial. Its none knows save God. The allegorical verses are an arena of trial in the Quran. Indeed, in the verse relating to the possessors of kernels, those in whose hearts is deviation follow that of it which is allegorical, Al-Imran 3:7. At this juncture, the concept of the firmly rooted scholar comes to the fore. The characteristic of this class of scholars to whom the Quran addresses itself is, according to Ibn Arabi, as follows: the firmly rooted scholar, even if he knows the interpretation of the allegorical verse, knows it not through his own thoughts but only through God's informing him. He knows that the allegorical verse is allegorical and does not exceed the limit or remove it from its context. The reality of the allegorical is that it has two aspects, each of which faces a different direction. One faces toward the permitted, the other toward the forbidden. The inviolable in the allegorical is the resemblance. When it is interpreted according to one of these two aspects, you have rendered the verse inviolable. This takes the verse outside the truth. Interpreting a verse that looks toward two meanings according to only one of those aspects means rendering it inviolable, and this is to extract the verse from its own truth. The verse must remain allegorical. The interpretation of a thing does not come to pass unless it becomes visible, for here we speak of the contrary of the present state. Here interpretation belongs to the concealed knowledge and is hidden in the forms of the words. This knowledge remains unknown even to the Gnostics. At this point he points to a meaning of the utmost gravity and says, the firmly rooted scholars are those who have attained a high station in knowledge by bearing witness to the oneness of God. The possessors of knowledge in the verse of the Quran al-Hakim, God bore witness that there is no God but He, and so did the angels, and the possessors of knowledge, Al-Imran 3:18, are the firmly rooted scholars. Their distinguishing characteristic is that they have borne witness to the oneness of God and have thereby attained a high station in knowledge. In the Quran, the scholar is a meaning of the highest degree. God the Exalted teaches this interpretation without any discursive thought whatsoever. It is bestowed. We believe in it, all of it is from our Lord, Al-Imran 3:7, they say. Such a scholar, even though he knows the interpretation of the allegorical verse, refrains because the ruling of the verse is allegorical. Those who possess the of God are those of whom God the Exalted has said, "We taught him knowledge from our very presence." They have received knowledge through witnessing and through deeds. In this way they have inherited. Then Ibn Arabi, who defines the meanings of being upon insight and of capacity from different angles, makes the most striking statement of all, despite not having performed any legitimate deed that would render them possessed of capacity. This expression establishes the direct relationship between capacity and righteous deeds. Capacity is the fruit of a deed in the sense of righteous action. Indeed, he continues as follows: some attain a capacity through performing a legitimate deed, and the bestowed knowledge is in accordance with that capacity. God first vouchsafes a deed to his servant, then as the recompense of that deed, he gives knowledge. This is the meaning called bestowed knowledge. Concerning the possessors of knowledge, Ibn Arabi says, God the Exalted did not say possessors of faith, but rather possessors of knowledge, for the possessors of knowledge bore witness to the oneness of God prior to their faith in it. This expression points to the fact that the degree of knowledge stands above the degree of faith. This is the quality of the angels and the messengers. He continues, knowledge is a dominion. There is no dominion more magnificent than knowledge. At this juncture it is also necessary to note briefly what the possessors of insight who appear in the classification of addresses in the Quran signify. According to Ibn Arabi, an eye that will pass from the exoteric to the esoteric does not halt before any veil. This is looking at things with the gaze of admonitory lesson. God has given this admonitory lesson to the possessors of insight. Insight is a cause that, when one reflects and takes an admonitory lesson from what one sees, leads to the esoteric. Ibn Arabi says, I converted my reflection into an admonitory lesson. According to this expression, the degree of admonitory lesson that follows reflection is a window opening onto the esoteric of that meaning. Now it is not merely thinking that is at issue, but also seeing with the admonitory gaze. The essential point of the matter, from the perspective of being able to apprehend the Quran, is precisely the meaning of exoteric and esoteric. Ibn Arabi says, the people of God have treated the matter at the level of exoteric and esoteric. They have seen that every ruling which they accept in its exoteric dimension has an aspect in its esoteric dimension as well, and they have performed their worship in what God has made obligatory in both the exoteric and the esoteric. That is to say, the people of God have treated the Quran not through the exoteric alone or the esoteric alone, but by seeing both dimensions together, and have performed their worship accordingly. Each of the obligatory, the recommended and the desirable rulings found in the sacred law has an esoteric counterpart or has more than one ruling in accordance with the meanings that open to the servant in that matter. However, these esoteric counterparts are ultimately not independent of the rulings of the obligatory, the recommended, or the desirable. Thus, the ruling of the exoteric is distinguished from the esoteric, for the exoteric penetrates the esoteric. But in the esoteric there is no legitimate command that acts upon the exoteric. What is in the esoteric is confined to itself, for all that is in the esoteric consists entirely of meanings. The exoteric, by contrast, is the sensory world. Whereas the transition from the world of the senses to meaning is possible, the transition from meaning to the world of the senses is not. For this reason, in the sacred law, taking the admonitory lesson has been commanded. Because the book of the sacred law has come in its exoteric dimension, the relationship of the rulings with the esoteric can only be understood through taking the admonitory lesson. This point is of the utmost importance. In Islamic thought, approaches have existed that read the Quran solely as esoteric. These are called the Biniya. They possess an understanding that sets aside the exoteric ruling and interprets everything entirely according to the esoteric, saying this is the essential meaning. The Shah mode of Quranic reading is also of this kind. Ibn Arabi does not accept this approach, saying, "We are obliged to follow the exoteric, for the meaning in the esoteric does not produce a ruling. But it must nevertheless be known as a method." When the exoteric and the esoteric of the Quran are mentioned, he underlines that the essence of the matter is the admonitory lesson. Whenever a form appears in the cosmos that God has created, that being which has been created in the sensory world has a spirit, and this spirit passes over into the form of that thing. The admonitory lesson in the esoteric, and this we call consideration, is in this context. Accordingly, the key concept that establishes the relationship between exoteric and esoteric in the Quran is the admonitory lesson. The admonitory lesson is the transition from something seen in the exoteric to the meaning in the esoteric. And this transition does not occur at random, but through a language, for the esoteric cannot be expressed directly, it can only be pointed to by a sign. The forms seen in the exoteric point toward a meaning other than themselves. For this reason, reading the Quran with the admonitory gaze simultaneously requires decoding its language of signs. At precisely this point, the matter ceases to be merely the distinction of exoteric and esoteric and becomes the matter of how signs are understood. What, then, does Ibn Arabi understand by trace, sign, and symbol? As is known, Ibn Arabi has an elusive exegesis. He expresses the principles related to this meaning as follows. The trace comes into being from the sign. The symbol finds existence through the composition of letters in speech. The symbol is speaking through signs that only those to whom something is being communicated will understand. In essence, the symbol is a word. But the exoteric dimension of this word gives a meaning that the speaker does not intend. Truly, symbols are not intended in themselves, on the contrary, because they are symbols, they intend what they point to. The place where symbols are used in the Quran is all the verses that express the admonitory lesson. It is the same for signs and allusions. The symbol is an expression accomplished through the sign. For this reason, the focal point in the elusive reading of the Quran is the verses of the admonitory lesson. Ibn Arabi sees the path to arriving at gnosis, marifa, in the surpassing of reflection, and explains that this can only be accomplished through the admonitory lesson. This meaning also presents itself in the understanding of the Quran. The sign is the admonitory verses of the Quran. Signs and symbols concentrate in the verses that come with the command, "Do you not take an admonitory lesson?"